Hi, everyone. Welcome to the soft launch of Pathway to the Podium, a podcast covering all aspects of sports, sports business, the media business, entertainment, and anything else people may find interesting. I'm your host, Jake Kline. The format of this podcast, sometimes it would be just me talking about various subjects. Other times I'd be speaking with guests in a long-form interview style. People who hail from all corners of the industries I just mentioned. We're all striving for a podium, and that podium can take many forms. What's yours? That is what I would like to explore on this podcast. You can find my insights in a bunch of publications, including John Wall Street, Program Insider, Barrett Media, and the Players Company. I'm proud to say I've twice been named by Sportico as a top 50 sports business Twitter follow. And speaking of, please shoot me a follow on X/Twitter, of course, at Jake A. Kline. That is JakeAKline. Plus, you can follow this podcast as well at Pathway to the Pod. All right, we're going to get right to it. Like I said, this is a soft launch, and it's lights out because we're starting with Formula One. A new Formula One season is underway. New cars, new set of regulations, a brand new team, hello Cadillac. Even a new U.S. broadcaster as Apple takes over from ESPN. We have a newly married driver. Congrats to Charles Leclerc. With all these changes, and there are a lot of changes here, the roughly 50-50 split between internal combustion and electrical power, use of biofuels, different power unit providers for some of these teams, no more DRS, the addition of active aero, heck, even the extended race start. The number one question was, what exactly the on-track product, the racing quality, will look like? Would this new look F1 still be compelling? And there were plenty of the sky's falling prognostications thrown around years ago when these regulations were first announced, when they were first planned. And lots of those voices, as I'm sure you will notice, grew considerably louder during the preseason. You heard descriptions saying it's Formula E on steroids, or this isn't in the spirit of F1. But until the fans around the world truly saw these cars in action, it was all conjecture. Well, Melbourne was the big reveal. Now, if you're a frequent watcher of Formula One, it's readily apparent the cars behave differently. On the corners, yes, but particularly on the straights. This is especially on display during qualifying when drivers are doing their flying laps, because essentially they're unencumbered, right? They're not jumbled up. It just shows, first and foremost, it's different. Aesthetically, the cars look good, but the performance, again, is a different story. That being said, and I want to make this quite clear, for those expecting this to be a complete disaster on race day, it really wasn't. You know, it wasn't terrible. It still feels off a bit, but it was a decent enough product. And on the plus side, there were a lot more overtakes. Now, unquestionably, these are pretty wholesale changes that we have in front of us. And I am personally of the opinion that judgment shouldn't be rendered on just one race alone. This is going to take time. That being said, perhaps it would have made more sense if F1 had implemented these changes gradually instead of applying them all in one fell swoop. it's easier to isolate variables and determine what needs to be tweaked when you do it one at a time, right? You sprinkle a little bit here and there rather than abandoning the existing recipe. Turn to the competition itself. The general consensus is that 4 teams, Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, whichever order you want to put them in, appear to be the top contenders entering this 26 campaign. Let's start with Mercedes. George Russell, he's only 28. Think about that. He's only 28, yet he appears so wise beyond his years. He's very poised. Kimi has had his highs and lows last season, his debut year. I think back to when he was holding off a charging Max in Brazil, which was probably his most impressive moment. There was speculation Mercedes were holding back throughout this preseason, that they were keeping their cards close to their chest. Well, they went 1-2 in qualifying, and then they went 1-2 in the race itself. So good for them, and credit to the mechanics for getting Antonelli's car ready in time during qualifying. Of course, that red flag helped, but still, that was very clutch by them to do that. How about Red Bull? Verstappen opened 2026 with a truly strange crash in qualifying on the very first flying lap as the rear axle locked. He had to get x-rays on his hands. Fortunately, those came back negative. Despite this inauspicious start, it's still pretty safe to say there's no driver in the world better equipped to handle this new form of F1 than Max. And that was on full display during the race itself, as Verstappen finished 6th, despite starting at the back, gaining 14 places. Very impressive. Max, perhaps unsurprisingly, has been one of the more vocal critics of the 26 changes. Others certainly, of course, feel the same way. But if anyone's earned the ability to speak out on the state of the sport, it is him, without question. Max really is the ultimate competitor, isn't he? And you think back to that second half surge he had, once Horner was removed last season. Bet against him at your own risk. That's all I say. And hey, let's give Hadjar his flowers too. He was 3rd in qualifying in his Red Bull debut, having been promoted from Racing Bulls. That being said, that DNF was disappointing. But the biggest disappointment, by far, the weekend, was Piastri, crashing out in his home Grand Prix during the formation lap. McLaren, it's strange, they're the reigning world champs, back-to-back in the constructors, and Norris, of course, championing the drivers, and yet there hasn't been that much talk about them, if you think about it. It's strange. An important question to address as the season unfolds. Have there been any philosophical changes made to the papaya rules, given Lando won a title? Or is Oscar still on equal footing? To be determined. Maybe we should call into the World Champion hotline for further info. This was documented, in fact, in the 3rd episode of Drive to Survive, where Zach Brown made it clear his preference of having 2 number 1s. But then again, this team has had a whole offseason to self-evaluate and review the 2025 campaign. And what occurred in Canada was certainly beyond their mind, as will how they closed out the end of last season, which could have been an all-time epic collapse. Something to bear in mind. All right, on to Ferrari. Leclerc and Hamilton, both extremely talented drivers, and they finished 3rd and 4th in this race. And the major difference here between Mercedes and Ferrari was essentially that Mercedes pitted early under a virtuous safety car. And meanwhile, Ferrari decided to wait to pit when it was green. And in the end, it worked better for Mercedes. You know, you think of Ferrari, you think of that name, that brand, they're synonymous with the sport. And the state of F1 is far better when Ferrari are competitive. And it's nice to see them near the top right now. But if you look back at recent history, I'm still a bit skeptical. I really am about this team. So we'll have to see what happens here. And hey, shout out to Lindbald for scoring points in his F1 debut. Very, very impressive. He's, in fact, the third youngest to score points in F1. He finished 8th on the day. And hey, Cadillac, brand new team. In their debut, they crossed the finish line with one of their drivers, with Perez. Good for them. Seriously. Really, really good for them. All right. On the other hand, we need to talk about Aston Martin. Coming off a horrific preseason testing with the Honda engine. It was absolutely horrific what happened with the Honda engine and its development. We heard some amazing sound bites from Adrian Newey this past week. And coming into this Grand Prix, they reported extreme vibration problems, which were so bad that the drivers were concerned it could cause permanent nerve damage. The team essentially conceded before race day. And then, of course, you had the shortage of batteries. All in all, it was just nightmare stuff. Particularly from a squad that is disestablished, like I said, and has put in such a major investment to improve. And so far, they haven't done so at all. And it's a bit head-scratching, really. All right, but hey, whether you love this new version of F1, whether you hate it, or if you're somewhere in between, if you're ambivalent, or you just don't even know yet, it's important not to read too much into this one singular race, right? Because each circuit is different. And with Australia, it doesn't have a lot of corners, all right? And that's where the energy harvesting happens the most. And it's kind of ironic, too, because if you think about it, the drivers go from the Bahrain testing. Bahrain has a lot of braking. To this track here in Melbourne, that has some of the least amount of braking in all of F1. It's an extremely energy-starved track. So it's quite a contrast, and it's kind of tough to glean too much from it at this point. If we look forward, it might take, a few more races, a few more weeks. Heck, it might even take a few more months to determine which teams are handling this new rules regime the best. And this is important as well. Recall the oft-discussed compression rules. However you feel about it, the FIA made its decision right before the start of the season. Beginning with Monaco, measurement will happen at both ambient and 130 degrees centigrade. That's 7 races, including the just completed Australian Grand Prix, which are ambient only. Then the remaining 17 races include the heat measurement as well. And then next season, it will only be the heat measurement. So they kind of hedged their bet a bit. It would have been nice if the FIA had made this decision sooner. I don't understand why this had to come down to just a few days before the season truly kicked off. This was something, again, that could have easily have been anticipated. And it was anticipated. And this was something that teams spoke about quite frequently in the months leading up to Australia. So a lot of this was foreseeable. And yes, a decision was made. Personally, I don't really know how to feel about it myself. But hey, at least there's clarity now. We will see what happens after we go to this new regime, this new mini regime of both ambient and heat. If that's going to impact the performance of these drivers, of these cars, of these teams, or if this was entirely overblown topic. I don't know. We shall see. But whichever driver best navigates all of these changes, and there are plentiful, there's so many changes this time, who exemplifies the willingness to adapt the most, will sit at that metaphorical pole position for the world title. Another note, as I mentioned at the top, Apple TV is the new US media rights holder of F1. Now for me, the stream was seamless. No issues at all. Really good picture quality. That being said, as we all know, everyone's streaming experience can be quite different due to a myriad of factors, so I can't speak on behalf of others, but they get top marks from me, and I haven't really seen anything too negative on social media, so that's a good thing. And if you think about it, Apple is truly fit as the new media rights holder in the US after that extremely successful F1 movie, which they brought to the big screen with the assistance of Warner Brothers. And Jerry Bruckheimer has already confirmed that a sequel is in development. And remember, this is a fun fact here, remember, the director of that film, Joseph Kosinski, he also directed Top Gun Maverick. And Top Gun Maverick was a co-production between Paramount and David Ellison's Skydance. And of course, subsequently, Skydance bought Paramount, and pending regulatory approval, this new larger Paramount will acquire Warner Brothers. So all three now under one umbrella. But hey, back to Apple for a second. This isn't anything new. Sports leagues chasing top dollar at the expense of the number of eyeballs, particularly with motorsports. You saw this happen with NASCAR some years ago when they moved from broadcast to cable. And now, of course, what you see is this switch from traditional TV to streaming. If we just rewind it for a second and look back, under the now expired ESPN deal, several races aired on BroadcastNet ABC. That's huge reach. The Miami Grand Prix was shown on ABC instead of an NBA playoff game. Think about that. Now, I greatly respect the Apple TV brand. I really do. They've won a ton of awards for their shows, The Studio, Severance in particular. And if you pay attention to them over the past couple of years, as they've grown this platform, they're very much following the prestige TV strategy HBO long established decades ago. That being said, far more likely than not, fewer people will watch F1 races this year than last year, simply because they're no longer on broadcast or cable TV. That's just the reality of it. But here's the important point. Viewership isn't the main objective here. Instead, it's engagement and brand awareness. With the Apple deal, Formula One isn't just getting a broadcaster, they're getting all the positives, all the promotion that comes with the Apple name, and the literal hundreds of millions of Apple devices there are in the US. Liberty Media CEO Derek Chang, recently speaking about Apple, said this: "They have so many touch points that go well beyond what you think about from a traditional television standpoint. We don't focus on reach and an archaic definition of how many people are watching on TV. But really, how do you touch your fans? How do you engage with your fans?" And Apple undoubtedly is making this new relationship a priority. They're promoting this hard. Far more than they have done with any other sport in their portfolio, if you think about it. Let's start with F1 TV, which is fully integrated, meaning there's no double paywall. If you have an Apple TV subscription, you get all the F1 races. Simple as that. And you get the F1 TV content, all of it, at no additional cost. That's great. That's really, really awesome that they did that. And it's other things too. It's small things, but it's notable. For instance, if you open Apple Maps, they have these very detailed 3D renderings of all the circuits. You can listen to all the races for free, even if you don't have Apple TV, on Apple Music. There's also a dedicated F1 collection on Apple Podcasts. And then there's this. This is really interesting what they did here. Apple reached this unique deal with Netflix, where the new season of Drive to Survive, the one that chronicles the 2025 season, is available on both platforms, both Netflix, as it's always been, and Apple. Similarly, both Apple and Netflix will show the Canadian Grand Prix. That was kind of the exchange here. And FYI, the Canadian Grand Prix is the same day as the Indy 500. But Apple doesn't stop there. No, they have more partnerships here, starting with the Miami Grand Prix. Practice sessions, qualifying sessions as well, will be available on Yahoo, in addition to, of course, being on Apple. On the free streaming platform Tubi, there'll be these altcasts of races with commentary provided by content creators. And it gets even better. Like, it's really shocking the amount of things they do here. 5 of this year's races, this is Miami, Monaco, Silverstone, Monza, and Austin. 5 of those races, those 5, will be shown in IMAX theaters. So remember, F1 the movie did extremely well in the PLF format, the premium large format, extremely well. So why not show some of these actual races there too? Makes complete sense. So all this to say, Apple is pretty much leaving no stone unturned here. And to be clear, I'm in no way getting paid by Apple to say any of this. If they want to, though, if they want to pay me, that's great. I mean, I'm not going to say no. I wouldn't complain about that. Hook me up, Tim, please. Go right ahead. Hook me up. But I list all these initiatives, these product placement ideas, these activations that Apple's doing here to underscore how groundbreaking this new media deal is and how much potential there is moving forward. And this isn't just about F1 either, no. I fully expect other leagues and broadcasters, particularly the tech giants here, to emulate aspects of this deal in future agreements. This is the way. This is the way moving forward. On a related subject, F1 already has felt the effects of the conflict in the Middle East, with many teams having to adjust their travel plans just to get to Melbourne. Keep a close eye here on the Bahrain Grand Prix and the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Those race days are set respectively on April 12th and April 19th, back-to-back weekends. And frankly, those would appear to be seriously in doubt of actually happening. Already, the opening round of the World Endurance Championship in Qatar, scheduled for the end of March, that has been postponed indefinitely. Similarly, a Pirelli tire test scheduled for Bahrain at the end of February, that was canned. But as of this recording for F1, no announcement has been made yet, and as we well know how this works, there is no announcement until there's an announcement. But I'd expect one shortly. The bigger question becomes whether makeup races at other circuits are implemented. And that's very logistically difficult. Or if F1 leaders settle for having less than a full slate in 26. And it's not just those 2 races. If we go further ahead, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is September 26. The Qatar Grand Prix, November 29th. And then the season finale in Abu Dhabi is dated for December 6th. All of those likewise potentially could be impacted. Now, F1 is accustomed to making changes. They've done so in the past, and I'm sure they will continue to do so in the future. Remember, it wasn't that long ago. They navigated through the lockdowns that were associated with COVID. These challenges always crop up. So we'll see what they do, but I'm fully expecting there will be changes made to the calendar. But hey, one race down, and we have 23 or fewer races to go. One last thing before I wrap this. Each episode of this podcast will end with a segment called Jake's Takeaways, which somewhat rhymes. That's why I did it. These are some parting thoughts. Let's turn to Paramount and UFC for a sec. So, Paramount's new U.S. media rights deal with UFC, that began at the very start of 2026. But this past weekend's UFC 326 marked the very first time that CBS broadcasted a live UFC number event. And what they did here was quite interesting. They did coverage from 8 p.m. to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And that was the last hour of the prelims and the first hour of the main card that aired on CBS. Meanwhile, the entire card, all of the fights, you could watch on Paramount Plus. But for that 2-hour span, you could watch it on Paramount Plus and or CBS. And that's clever. What they did there was very clever because it gives viewers a little taste of the UFC if they aren't familiar with it. And if they like what they see, if they can cover what they see, they might be more willing to switch over to the app. It's a simple, but I think it's actually a pretty effective marketing strategy, what they did there. Another thing that's changed with this new UFC media rights deal, the fights themselves are happening slightly earlier in the night. It was usually the long-held norm that the final fight would end a bit before 1:30 a.m., sometimes 1 a.m., that half-hour range. Now it's been pushed, it's been shifted up, I should say, 1 hour. Now they end around 12:30 a.m. or so. And, for those who aren't used to staying up late, that makes a difference. On the other hand, though, you always have West Coast viewers as well. So it cuts both ways. But what I like about both these things, this idea of putting portions of fights on CBS and, changing the schedule around here a little bit, these serve as additional examples of what a new sports media deal can bring and how you can be innovative and how both parties, both sides of this, can show a willingness to adjust, to keep open mind and make changes accordingly. And you have to start wondering, if Paramount's acquisition of Warner Brothers is completed, if that goes through, whether we'll be seeing some UFC content on TNT or other cable nets owned by Warner Brothers. It's all about flexibility, right? Something to consider. All right. So thank you very much for listening to this debut episode. Remember, please subscribe and follow if you are so inclined. And again, on Twitter, that's at Jake A. Kline, JakeAKline, and at Pathway To The Pod. Additionally, videos on youtube.com/at Pathway To The Podium Pod. And if you'd like to, send any inquiries you may have via email to pathwaytothepodium@gmail.com. Best wishes. Until next time, this is Pathway To The Podium with Jake Kline. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.